At this season, we commemorate the Holocaust amid a contagion that has also killed hordes of innocent people. The corona fatalities are slaughtered not by hate, but by chance and denial and neglect. They belong not to a particular race or religion, but to every branch of humanity. The poor and meek are hit hardest. They usually are. But the rich and mighty are dying too. And if you're wondering where God is, you're not alone. We are living through an epic disaster, a mammoth catastrophe. Whatever you thought 2020 would be famous for, newsflash, 2020 will go down in history as the year of the plague. It's not on a par with the Holocaust, but it does teach us something powerful about the Holocaust. A, we don't deserve it. B, it's more important than ever to have compassion for each other. And C, it's all right to doubt God, to challenge God, to be angry with God. If that's where you're at, that's real. Some of the current deceased are caregivers, medical staff, or workers in essential businesses. They are sacrificing their lives for us, like Chana Senesh and her comrades who died fighting the Nazis, like Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues who defied ancient Rome, whom we list as the 10 martyrs on Yom Kippur afternoon. Our debt to our martyrs can never be repaid. We revere them solemnly, deeply. One more thing the pandemic teaches us about the Holocaust. Even if we doubt or challenge, even if we rage or fume, God is on our side. For the Corona 100,000, for the Holocaust 6 million, for the righteous victims of every pestilence and pogrom since creation, God is on their side. That may not change the outcome in the realm of time and space, but it makes all the difference. As God saves us even when we don't feel saved, so God is on our side even when we feel abandoned. Where is God? God is with us, now and always. Raymond Weinberger lived in Anvers, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, age 7. Yachcha Schnell lived in Blazova, killed by the Nazis, age 3. Izya Zlotnikov, born 1939, lived in Gaisin, killed by the Nazis in Gaisin, 1941, age 2. Betya Bezub lived in Bratslav, killed by the Nazis in Bratslav, 1942, age 9. Yidel Yoshovik, born 1934, lived in Hust, killed by the Nazis, age 8. Israel Zondhaus lived in Kabesti, killed by the Nazis in Kabesti, age 9. Salusia Rinsky, born 1939, lived in Warsaw, killed by the Nazis in Warsaw, 1942, age 3. Shia Fixler, born 1941, lived in Maidan, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, 1944, age 5. Hedy Eisenstein, born 1936, lived in Senta, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, 1944, age 8. Lebush Zaltzman, killed by the Nazis in Lublin, age 9. Yosef Zlotnikov, born 1932, lived in Khotimsk, killed by the Nazis, 1942, age 10. Manya Young, born 1936, lived in Rotterdam, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, 1943, age 7. Basha Messinger, born 1935, lived in Shebzhetchin, killed by the Nazis in Belzig, 1942, age 7. Rumela Frank, born 1939, lived in Krasna, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, 1944, age 5. Irene Bernardout, lived in Kavala, killed by the Nazis in Treblinka, 1943, age 3. Anniko Friedman, born 1942, lived in Samar Nemeti, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, 1944, age 2. Rafal Bershivka, born 1938, lived in Mlinov, killed by the Nazis in Mlinov, 1942, age 3. Fegele Izbitsky, lived in Proshovice, killed by the Nazis in Birkenau, 1942, age 10. Yakov First, born 1935, lived in Humene, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, 1944, age 9. Renia Mashlanka, born 1938, lived in Łódź, killed by the Nazis in Łódź, 1944, age 4. Yakov Akiraisen, born 1941, lived in Warsaw, killed by the Nazis in Treblinka, 1942, age 1. Sora Wolf, born 1936, lived in Kalotsava Lazi, killed by the Nazis in Kalotsava Lazi, 1943, age 7. Anja Schleffler, lived in Kuti, killed by the Nazis in Kuti, age 7. Izio Auerbach, born 1934, lived in Zlochov, killed by the Nazis, 1944, age 10. Chanushia Yazvitsky, born 1934, lived in Kielce, killed by the Nazis in Kielce, 1943, age 9. Istvan Weiss, lived in Kaposvar, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, 1944, age 4. Lebi Kashierer, lived in Okna Slatina, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, 1944, age 10. Mara Gudeskaya, born 1933, lived in Odessa, killed by the Nazis in Odessa, 1941, age 8. Shantia Langade, born 1936, lived in Amsterdam, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, 1942, age 6. Rofeliko Akuni, lived in Salonika, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, 1943, age 8. Chaya Gottesman, born 1940, lived in Sala Nad Vahom, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, 1944, age 4. Rosa Kaufman, born 1935, lived in Chenger, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, 1944, age 9. Sprinza Stopnitska, lived in Kielce, killed by the Nazis in Majdanek, 1943, age 8. Sivia Kola, born 1933, lived in Pabianice, killed by the Nazis in Treblinka, 1943, age 10. Arala Noyak, born 1932, lived in Krasai, killed by the Nazis in 1941, age 9. Mariana van Leven, born 1938, lived in Amsterdam, killed by the Nazis in Sobibor, 1943, age 5. Leva Korotinsky, born 1940, lived in Kiev, killed by the Nazis in Babi Yar, 1941, age 1. Mikey Sasson, lived in Thessaloniki, killed by the Nazis in 1943, age 5. Roji Georgi, born 1937, lived in Székesfehérvár, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, 1944, age 7. Meir Gonchorovich, born 1941, lived in Czestochowa, killed by the Nazis in Czestochowa, 1942, age 1. Meyer Kalman, killed by the Nazis at age 50, lived in Poland, killed in Treblinka, 1942. Estera Kalman, lived in Poland, killed by the Nazis in Treblinka, 1942, age 49. Eugen Fisch, lived in Hungary, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, 1944, age 65. Stefan Fuchs, lived in Hungary, killed by the Nazis at Voronezh, Russia, 1942, age 40. Agnes Fuchs, lived in Czechoslovakia, killed by the Nazis in Auschwitz, 1944, age 31. Bela Fuchs, lived in Czechoslovakia, killed by the Nazis at Bernau, Germany, 1944, age 39. Necha Kaczerginski, lived in Poland, killed by the Nazis at Ponary, Vilna, Poland, 1941, age 26. Dvora Wilkomirski, lived in Poland, killed by the Nazis at Ponary, Vilna, Poland, 1941, age 42. Rivka Koppelman, lived in Poland, killed by the Nazis at Brest-Litovsk, Polesia, Poland, 1942, age 42. Lev Bant, lived in the USSR, killed by the Nazis at Odessa, Ukraine, USSR, 1941, age 49. Rachel Rosnick, lived in the USSR, killed by the Nazis at Rudnya, Smolensk, Russia, USSR, 1941, 39 years old. Chaim Basin, lived in the USSR, killed by the Nazis at Rudnya, Smolensk, Russia, 1941, age 43. Chana Lazarev, lived in the USSR, killed by the Nazis at Voronezh, Russia, USSR, 1942, age 61. Clara Roech, lived in the USSR, killed by the Nazis at Krasnodar, Russia, USSR, 1942, age 41. Sofa Tenenbaum, lived in the USSR, killed by the Nazis at Odessa, Ukraine, 1942, age 18. Esther Shifrin, lived in the USSR, killed by the Nazis in Minsk, Belorussia, USSR, 1941, age 35. Samuel Machlin, lived in the USSR, killed by the Nazis in Minsk, Belorussia, USSR, 1941, age 48. Samuel Poltorak, lived in the USSR, killed by the Nazis in Kiev, Ukraine, USSR, 1941, age 33. Martha Schwab, lived in Germany, killed by the Nazis in Poland, 1942, age 54. Isaac Malamud, lived in the USSR, killed by the Nazis in Rostov-na-Donu, Russia, USSR, 1943, age 40. Mendel Schnoll, lived in the USSR, killed by the Nazis at Velizh, Smolensk, Russia, USSR, 1942, age 65. Ita Schnoll, lived in the USSR, killed by the Nazis at Velizh, Smolensk, Russia, USSR, in 1942, age 63. Lena Baranovsky, lived in the USSR, killed by the Nazis in Velizh, Smolensk, Russia, USSR, 1942, age 32. Lisa Meisel, lived in the USSR, killed by the Nazis in Minsk, Belorussia, USSR, 1942, age 31. Ita Adam, lived in Poland, killed by the Nazis in Belzec, 1942, age 62. Isaac Temmer, lived in the USSR, killed by the Nazis in Epitovka, Kamenets-Podolsky, Ukraine, USSR, 1941, age 24. Ruvim Lifshitz, lived in the USSR, killed by the Nazis in Moscow, Russia, USSR, 1942, age 24. Don Adam, lived in Poland, killed by the Nazis in Przemysl, Lvov, Poland, 1942, age 70. Tanchum Axelrod, lived in the USSR, killed by the Nazis in Sinyavino, Leningrad, Russia, USSR, 1942, age 35. Meyer Goffman, lived in the USSR, killed by the Nazis in Warsaw, Poland, 1944, age 33. Yosef Levin, lived in the USSR, killed by the Nazis in Smolensk, Russia, USSR, 1942, age 40. Vladimir Litvak, lived in the USSR, killed by the Nazis in Austria, 1944, age 46. Minya Gershenson, lived in the USSR, killed by the Nazis in Minsk, Belarusia, 1942, age 39. Yuda Belkind, lived in the USSR, killed by the Nazis in Minsk, Belarusia, USSR, 1941, age 29. Hannah Lerner, lived in the USSR, killed by the Nazis in Zyaslav Kamenets-Podolsky, Ukraine, USSR, 1941, age 47. Celia Bierstein, lived in the USSR, killed by the Nazis in Epitovka, Kamenets-Podolsky, Ukraine, USSR, 1941, age 39. Lisa Bierstein, USSR, lived in the USSR, killed by the Nazis in Epitovka, Kamenets-Podolsky, Ukraine, USSR, 1941, age 19. Leba Steinberg, lived in Poland, killed by the Nazis in Pinsk, Polesia, Poland, 1941, age 55. Matvey Margolin, lived in the USSR, killed by the Nazis in Baku, Azerbaijan, USSR, 1942, age 33. May their memory be a blessing.